The Day the Skies Fell, an original post-apocalyptic EMP story by the author, Declan Conner. Some scenes contain violence that may not be suitable for certain audiences. Part 1. Halfway through setting up a trade with the Singapore Commodity Exchange on the late shift, the screens at my trading station flickered then died. My palm slapped the surface of my desk at the annoyance. The fluorescent sparked off, leaving the office in darkness. Opening the desk drawer, I retrieved my phone. At least my cell phone worked. I put it in flashlight mode, but the internet signal was lost. After removing my headphones, a plethora of sound from chairs scraping on the ceramic floor offended my hearing. The annoyance was accompanied by shouts of shit, blast, and a few damns from Tony at the next trading desk to me. "Cool it, man," I said. "Backup generator will kick in soon and reboot the system." I rose from my chair. Walked over to the window. The silhouettes of the New York skyscrapers were in darkness. The northern lights which had dominated the sky these past few weeks mesmerized me as their differing colored hues danced in the night sky. On my way to my desk, flashes of light burst outside to the cracking sound of thunder, rattling the windows. Tony dove under his desk. "Rob, we're under attack," he cried out to me. I let out a sigh, guessing it was his PTSD surfacing from our tour of duty. A cheer went up in the office as the emergency signs at the exit lit up, then the starters and the fluorescents clicked into life. I stepped over to Tony's desk. "Let's get you out of there, bud. We're not under attack." I got down beside of him. Removed his hands that grasped his head as if desperately keeping it in situ. "It's okay, bud. I'm here. We're good." Storm by the looks of it. I helped him from under his desk. "Come on, we have trades to make if you want to make bonus." He stiffened up. Rolled his head and composed himself. He told me about his night sweats, but that's the first time I'd witnessed him having a panic attack. Not a pretty sight. Unnerving really. "Sorry," he said. "No need." The monitors finally came online. I continued on to make the trade for the precious metals in Singapore, when the trade failed with the monitor flickering, then going blank. My eyes widened when I glanced at the adjoining screen with the Dow turning red and values clocking downward at speed. It struck me there wouldn't be anyone stupid enough for me to offload the losses to. Even the stock darlings that had taken over from .com, they had nosedived into the red with the rest. My eyes settled on the TV monitor with the caption rolling at the bottom below the news presenter, saying an EMP strike had disrupted the power grids in some areas. My entire psyche was hit with negativity. Not surprising really, since the stocks and trades I held had wiped out my net worth. If the power outage wasn't caused by the storm, but an EMP strike that the scientists were predicting, and which had been all the talk in the news lately, then it made sense for the ever-declining values of trades on the screen. It was assert that if the power failed for a long period, production would cease. All my hopes of retiring before I was 40, to live a stress-free life in the countryside was now going down the tubes. Dreams of buying a small holding, and finding a partner to raise children with, were sinking in a sea of red data before my eyes. My jaw hit south. The screens at my station went blank once more, the office in darkness as the lighting failed. The screens going blank wouldn't be the stock exchange putting a hold on trades as a failsafe, I reasoned. Maybe I should have taken more notice of the differing prophecies from the panels of pundits between CNN and Fox News and taken more notice of the doomsayers. I'd taken the stance it had been scientific mumbo-jumbo. A call came through with my client screaming down the line. "Yeah, I know, but I can't," I said. The phone line went dead before I could finish. It wasn't my client cutting the call. The line was dead. In a fog of despair, I pulled off my headphones and slammed them on the desk along with the mic, only to hear the hissing of someone emptying a fire extinguisher at a sparking monitor at their station. It was as if I'd entered an alternate zone, my mind working overtime. Ma always said I pondered too much, searching for scenarios when there were problems to face. It was the nature of the beast. I couldn't help myself. Besides, it had gotten me out of some scrapes on missions during my time in the service. It ran through my mind that the scientists forecast it would happen. Most friends I talked to had taken the latest scientific warnings about the increased solar flare activity doing the media rounds as bullshit. It was considered as if it were some event that would happen way in the future, or not at all. Hence, I'd largely ignored it as it was generally thought of as unlikely to transpire. To me it was like the boy crying wolf with the news giving out warnings stretching back years. Yes, there were undeniable precedents of disasters in history that were memorable for the devastation that they caused. I thought, from the Great Flood to the extinction of the dinosaurs, the Ice Age, World Wars, and the Great Depression, and God knows how many pandemics. But none of these had any consequence to me in my daily privileged life, or anyone else's life for that matter at the time. It was all history. Still, in my line of work, I'd have been stupid not to hedge my bets, so to a small degree, I was prepared, albeit with nothing more than my bug-out bag. This time, I sensed that what might befall us was different in the bubble of a world that I served at work. If the scientists were correct, it wouldn't be humankind that was causing the accelerating climate change that we had experienced of late but the weakening magnetic field the scientists had talked of. I dropped my head into my hands. I just witnessed what was likely the beginning of the collapse of world order as we knew it if the doomsayers were to be believed. I just hoped to Christ I wasn't overthinking it like I usually did. Part 2. My thoughts turned to what would happen if the situation couldn't be resolved. Besides my own wealth in the dumpster, the billionaires, and offshore trust fund CEOs that I rubbed shoulders with on the internet would see their gazillions in value reduced to zilch. Bitcoins, shares, paper money, gold, and other precious metals would become worthless. Let's face it, it was all an illusion anyway. You couldn't eat the damn stuff, save as a means to skim off the top in the merry-go-round of the world economy. The game was to slake a thirst to get rich through tax avoidance schemes at the expense of the ordinary citizen. Hell, the man in the street couldn't hide even a single dollar from the tax man. Government bonds that provided the backbone of government spending, pensions, and social services would only have any worth to set alight fires to keep warm. In God we trust would no longer mean anything other than as a meaningless motto printed on the currency. Those who believed in him would think he had crapped on us from the great height of the heavens. The only person anyone would be able to trust would be your own instincts to survive. I let out a long soulful sigh, needing to get a grip before my mind would implode, hanging on to the hope the situation would be temporary. "Rob, we have to get out of here," said Tony, fisting his keyboard, then ripping off his mic and pulling out his earpiece. I turned to look over at him. "I'll follow on later." "See you at the bar," he said, and he grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. "I doubt they'll be open with the outage," I said, but he ignored me as he hightailed it out of there. The odd sight of a sea of cell phone screens lighting the way made for the exits. Still paralyzed, I sat there until the room emptied. Emergency signs were still working on their own battery power over the exits. The green iridescent glow of the exit signs created a creepy aurora until they flashed, then extinguished. Holding my head in my hands, I clawed my fingers down my cheeks. Pushing back in my chair, I closed my eyes, then tilted my head backwards. There wasn't anyone to go home to. I'd lost the childhood love of my life when I'd joined the army and gone on tour. Said she couldn't bear the stress of knowing if I'd make it back alive. Truth was, as I found out, she was having an affair with a wealthy attorney friend of her dad at the time. Ever since then, I'd only ever had female comfort friends for mutual gratification. It was better that way. No one could get hurt while I concentrated on building wealth to match the scumbag who had stolen her from me. I swung around in my chair to the sound of footsteps. "Robert, you have to go. Security are locking down the offices," said our senior partner, Mr. Rathbone, an ex-captain of mine. "Right away, sir." He disappeared through the exit as I rose from my chair, then stepped over to the window, then I took a last look around the deserted office. Out in the hallway, I heard his footsteps going up the stairway. I rushed back to my desk and collected the photo of Mom, Dad, and my sister, slipping it in my jacket pocket. Out of my eye corner, something flashed by the window. Stepping over to the window, I couldn't see anything, the sidewalk hidden at the angle of sight from 15 floors up. At least I could see that the storm had been short-lived. There wasn't any rush to climb down the flights of stairs. I imagined the sidewalk would be awash with people making their way home. The only saving grace, I thought, was that most of the office workers would be long gone at that time of night. Down in the foyer, there were 3 security guards. "All clear," said one of the security guards who was loading his backpack straps on his shoulder. He looked surprised to see me. "You're lucky," I was about to lock the front doors, he said. What about Rathbone, I asked. He's gone. I scratched at the hair on my head, recalling him going up the stairway. Are you sure? I saw him go up to his office. The security guard let out a soulful sigh. When I say gone, I mean gone, and taken 2 more with him, he said and pointed outside the glass doors. In the space between 2 cars, I could see a mangle of bodies. My Adam's apple did a leap. Holy shit. The guard put his hand to my shoulder and gave it a squeeze as if in consolation. Holy shit, all right, he said. That's an understatement. He jumped before I could grab him when I was checking the helipad. When I arrived down here, saw he'd landed on 2 other poor souls. Be careful out there, they're jumping like it's a sport. Incidentally, don't expect driving home, most cars have come to a standstill with the EMPs taking out some of the vehicle's computers. Those still running are gridlocked. A shake of the head, and I wished I'd have taken more notice of the news reports and taken them seriously. Stepping outside, I hugged the side of the buildings along the sidewalk to the bar. The streets were already empty of people in the time I'd dallied in the office, cars abandoned. The few people that I did see had vacant expressions on their faces. It was that 1,000-mile stare I'd seen with survivors of action while on missions. Some with tears rolling down cheeks. For all the fail-safe devices, smoke bellowed from some of the tower blocks after the power surge. It looked as though anyone who was going to jump had already done so. Bodies appeared distressed in all sorts of contortions that were splattered on the top of vehicles, or on the sidewalk. It wasn't like I'd not seen dismembered and dead bodies before in war zones. All the same, to see it on home turf disturbed me as I entered the bar to the decibels off the scale with the banter. I checked my UV radiation badge on my lapel. With the sun having gone down some time ago, it had gone from almost red to where it hovered between green and orange. Over here, Tony called out in the candlelight, then continued to chug on a bottle of champagne as I edged through the throng. Jesus, did you see it? He asked. See what? It was like 9/11 all over again, but without the dust clouds. I shrugged my shoulders. No, the evacuation had died down when I left the office. How do we pay for our drinks without energy? I asked Tony. He's writing up tabs on the off chance it'll pass, but he doesn't ever expect them to get paid, he said and handed me the champagne bottle. I pushed it back. I'll go get a beer. Can't see what's to celebrate. Rathbone jumped. He splattered between 2 cars outside the entrance to our offices. Oh man. I'd seen them jumping, but I thought he'd have had more backbone. Me too. It was sad. We both owed him our jobs when we transitioned out of service. I recalled when he said that he preferred vets 'cause they obeyed orders, but showed initiative at the same time. Here's to Captain Rathbone, Tony said, putting the champagne bottle to his lips, with no sign of the panic he'd displayed in the office. Pushing my way through the throng, over at the bar, no one was serving. Service, I called out. A familiar voice answered me. It's serve yourself, the manager's just gone to get home, and the staff have deserted the bar, said Sandra, while sitting on a stool at the corner of the bar with the hatch open. Usual. Yeah. She gracefully slipped off of the stool, stooping to one side, her knees and legs together to save her dignity of wearing a mini skirt. She opened the cooler and took out a bottle, then skimmed off the top and handed it over. Your place or mine? She asked and sent me a seductive look, just as someone dug me with their elbow in my back. I turned to a woman snorting a line of coke on the bar and sighed. There was more coke being inhaled along the bar than was dispensed of the liquid type from behind the bar. Not that anyone could dispense it with the power out. A woman climbed on the bar after dragging a guitar from the wall and began to play and sing the old Frank Sinatra tune, My Way, sadly out of tune. The saddest part was that the crowd joined her in song. Well, what's it to be? Sandra asked over the din. We'll see. It's early doors. She knew what I meant. We were both players. We were the ones that got together when there was nothing else available at the end of the night and shared a need. Either that, or I'd have to rescue her from some ugly guy old enough to be her dad that thought he could buy her. A social media influencer, she'd made her fortune uploading raunchy videos of herself, and selling private photos to followers. Hardly wifey material, but then I was hardly hubby material as attracted as we seemed to be to each other. We drifted along in life like left and right gloves that fit snugly on the hands that you clasp together at times to get warm. The crowd pushed up against the bar, squashing me to screams from the women over at the entrance. The woman on the bar stopped singing and prancing, holding her mouth with one hand, her eyes dancing with fright. The guitar she held with the other hand slipped from her grasp, crashing behind the bar. Someone grabbed a hold of her from the bar top and hauled her down to the explosion of a gunshot and a sea of hands in the air going up like a Mexican wave of fear doing the rounds. I put my hand to my forehead and shook my head. It looked as though things were turning nasty. Part 3. Like the sea parting for Moses, the crowd formed a passage for a teenager of Hispanic appearance to charge through, brandishing an AR-15. Sandra grabbed her purse from the bar, lifted her backside on the seat, then sat on it. The boy leaped over the bar, then stepped on over to the register, stomping his finger on the button in a vain attempt for it to open. It showed how many brain cells he had active with the power out. Frustrated, he put the rifle to one side, picked up the register and with the wires trailing, smashed it down. Then he kicked at it when it still wouldn't open. Down the dividing line were another 6 of them, 2 with pillowcases either side, rifles poked at chests, watches and jewelry collected, along with wallets and purses. Their mode of transport blocked the entrance. Mountain bikes. At the door was a guy dressed head to toe in a black outfit and wearing a black helmet with a tinted visor down. He barked out orders to his crew in Spanish. To an explosion of a round, I saw one of the customers drop to the floor, a pool of blood oozing from their chest. I'd just been handed the rules of engagement. Kill or be killed. The boy behind the bar had worked up a frenzy, growling at the register. Our eyes locked. He grabbed his rifle and stepped over to me. Watch and wallet. I guess I wasn't about to argue with a rifle pointed at me. I took out my wallet and placed it on the bar, then removed my Rolex. Avoiding further eye contact, I noticed the trapdoor to the cellar behind the bar. His attention turned to Sandra, clawing at her gold chain, and ripped it from around her neck. Watch. Sandra slipped her watch from her wrist as he stepped out of the bar area. She held it out to him daintily between thumb and finger, then snatched it away as he tried to grab it. An oh no flashed through my mind at her doing that. Bitch. He dug the barrel into her midriff then fondled her breast. Don't get many of those to the pound, do we now, he said. Sandra glanced over at me as I palmed the fruit knife from the bar. It was as if telepathy kicked in between us. Having fun. Try it with both hands and take them out, she said, and pushed the barrel away. A quick glance at the gang, and they'd moved into the crowd. He shouldered the rifle strap and reached out to unfasten the buttons of her blouse, a lecherous grin on his lips to Sandra glancing my way and nodding her head slightly with as clear a message that I needed. Sandra slapped his face to screams at a round firing in the crowd. He turned to the sound of more gunfire, his back to me. In one fluid move, I grabbed him around the forehead and sliced him across his neck, then lowered him to the floor to him writhing and choking on his own blood. With his leather jacket open to one side, I noticed a pistol in his waistband, gathered it and handed it to Sandra. Leaving him to bleed out, I took hold of his rifle with one hand and grabbed Sandra with the other, stooping and dragging her behind the bar. I lifted the trapdoor. Good thinking with that distraction move. Get down there and sit on the steps till clear, I said and then lowered the trapdoor as she clambered down the stairs. My attention turned back to over the bar. The crowd had thinned out with some still hustling for the exit. There to one side I could see 2 bodies. The gang were kicking and stomping at one of the bodies on the floor. When I saw the victim's face, it was Tony. Taking aim, I took out the one holding a pistol aloft. Then another with a rifle in his hand. The rest skedaddled for the exit, one firing rounds over his shoulder and I ducked. His round struck the mirror and optics behind me, showering me in glass, and what smelled like brandy. With no more gunfire, and by the time I'd stalked to the door, they were charging away on their bikes. Taking aim, I felled one of them when he turned and fired off a round at me, with the rest escaping, pedaling away in the cover of the line of vehicles. When I arrived at Tony's side, a distressed-looking Gloria, one of the baristas who'd been drinking with them, was kneeling at his side, tears streaming down her cheeks. They'd only been seeing each other for a month, but they'd both become attached at the hip. Roger's dead, but Tony is alive, she said. I'll go get the medic kit from behind the bar. Lift the cellar trapdoor and let Sandra out while you're there, I said, and kneeling at Tony's side, I picked up the discarded pistol and slipped it into my waistband. Where are you shot? I asked as he moved his hands from his face, and I winced. He simply groaned, unable to talk. Not surprising, considering one side of his face and his upper lip had swollen to such an extent so as to make him almost unrecognizable. Blood oozed from a gash on his forehead. Unfasten his shirt while I see to his wound, said Gloria, with Sandra standing over her. Sandra handed me my wallet and watch. Gloria moved me aside. I'm a trained nurse, so leave him to me. Where is he shot? I asked. He wasn't shot. Roger was shot when he wouldn't hand over his wallet. Tony tried to take the gun from him, and he pistol whipped him to the floor, then the others jumped in. We need to get him to a hospital, I said, to Gloria, rolling her eyes. And how do we do that? Asked Gloria as she checked him over. He'll live. Nothing broken that I can see. He'll be badly bruised tomorrow and have a few aching ribs. Nothing that a few painkillers won't help him with, and rest for the gashes to heal. Help me to get him to sit up. With Tony propped up against the wall, he grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me to him. Whiskey, I was sure, he said. Did you say whiskey? He nodded. Gloria hurried over to the bar and returned with a large whiskey. We should phone the police, said Sandra. I raised an eyebrow at that remark. We can't. There's no landline or cell phone service, I said, and glanced around at the now empty bar, save for us and the dead bodies. I suggest we get out of here, or the gang might come back team-handed. We helped Tony get to his feet. Stooping, I picked up the other rifle and put the strap over my shoulder. Do you think you'll be able to walk? Gloria asked Tony. My apartment is nearest. I can look after you there. All he could manage was to nod, and we set off to the exit with Gloria propping him up as he limped to the door while grimacing. Stepping on ahead, I checked that the coast was clear. He won't make it to my apartment without we carry him. They dead-legged him when they kicked him, said Gloria. Looking around, I stepped over to one of the mountain bikes on its side and lifted it upright. At 220 pounds, there was no way we could carry him the distance. Let's get him on the saddle and he can push along with one leg. With Tony seated, he wobbled on down the sidewalk, pushing along with one leg, then stopped for us to catch up. Sandra passed me the pistol I'd given her, held onto my arm, and removed her stilettos. I wasn't expecting having to walk a distance, she said. A shot rang out from among the line of cars, the bullet ricocheting from the wall behind me. Tony wobbled and fell from the bike, the rest of us ducking behind the cars. It was looking as though the one I thought I'd shot outside was only wounded. Tony was on his hands and knees. I tossed the spare rifle to him, to another round smashing through the car window where we were hiding. You know the drill. Tony nodded. Count of 10, I said, and stalked into the line of cars, settling behind the hood of a Tesla, and cast my vision down the sight of the barrel. To the sound of Tony firing off a round, our assailant popped up to return fire. This time there was no mistake as I squeezed the trigger to a mist of brain matter and blood escaping from the back of the guy's head. I stalked on ahead and on over to his body. Sure enough, he was toast. I could see why he had stayed there. That first shot had ripped into his thigh. I unclipped his magazine and stuffed it into my jacket pocket. All clear, I called out, and shouldering the rifle strap, I recovered the guy's bike. When I returned to the others, Tony was back on the bike. This bike will come in handy, I said. Why the bike? Asked Sandra. When we get Gloria and Tony to her apartment, we can use the bikes to get to your apartment. It's a hell of a distance to the Brooklyn Bridge, unless you're up to walking in your bare feet. Sandra shrugged her shoulders, and we moved on past 5 blocks. Hearing the sound of glass smashing, I stopped and peeked around the corner, then ducked back. Holy shit. Unbelievable. They've gone into looting mode already. God knows how we get past them to get to Gloria's condo. All of them turned and looked at me as though I'd have the answer. Part 4. Intermittent explosions rang through the air in the distance. Tony ducked into an office block entrance alcove. He grabbed me by the shoulder, his eyes looking skyward. His expression indicated a mixture of fear and surprise. What the fuck, he called out. Tony pointed, and I followed his line of vision to where he'd pointed. I snatched my hand to my mouth. If I didn't know any different, I would have thought that we were under attack with missiles. Row after row of something burning up in the atmosphere against a backdrop of the dancing northern lights had caught me by surprise, but they weren't missiles. I knew that much from my tour in the Mideast. It had to be Starlink communication satellites knocked out of low orbit by the EMPs. Tony was now cowering, with Gloria attempting to calm his nerves. "It's only satellites, don't worry. We're not under attack," I said and then sighed. Sandra tugged at my arm and I spun around to see her looking skywards. It was her turn to be alarmed. But then, she wasn't the only one. I froze at seeing 2 passenger aircraft spiraling downward. I didn't see the crashes with the high-rise office buildings blocking the view, but the explosions deafened. With my head in my hands, thoughts of the poor souls and the fear they must have experienced sickened me. Sandra tapped me on the shoulder. "I think someone is following us. I've seen someone dressed in black twice now on a mountain bike and wearing a crash helmet. They've just turned at the intersection back there when I saw them." Turning around, I looked in the direction she mentioned, but the street was empty apart from abandoned vehicles. Taking a quick look around the corner, the looters were in full force. I knew the Target store. It was where I'd bought my Rolex. Thugs dragged out who I assumed was the owner and threw him to the ground, then dragged him up to kneel. One of them drew a pistol and shot him in the head and he keeled over to me wincing. There were too many to take them on. To the sound of a round firing behind me and the ping of a bullet hitting the stonework, it had me flinching. Sandra grabbed a hold of me, dragging me into the alcove. I was right, we are being followed. I saw him again. It must be one of the thugs that robbed the bar returning. My innards sighed. We couldn't go forward and we couldn't make it across the intersection without whoever was stalking us would hit one of us. There was a sudden loud crack of sound and the roar of engines and I peeked out in the direction of the looters. The fuselage of a passenger plane was hurling toward them without the wings, sparks and flame bellowing. They were stood there like rabbits in headlights with others rushing out of the stores as it hurtled toward them. Turning, I moved Gloria and Tony to one side and sprayed the glass door in the alcove with rounds and pushed them inside. "Get in there and get down." With the 3 of them inside, I hustled Sandra to the floor and landed on top of her. Flames flashed by the doorway with a whole host of debris scraping on the road as they zipped by. Then total calm, with not a sound. "What the hell was that?" asked Sandra. "It's a passenger plane that's crashed. EMPs must have knocked out their flight controls. Or maybe with the energy down, they couldn't home in on the runway and just ran out of gas. Stay here, I'll take a look." I took a quick look out, then stepped out of the alcove. The stench of aviation fuel had me retching, mixed as it was with the fuselage in flames and smoke bellowing. The fuselage was broken in 2, with the nose broken off and trapped in the jewelry store. In the opposite direction, one of the engines was wedged in a vehicle at the intersection. Taking a quick look around the corner at the interception, I ducked back at a muzzle flash. "What have you seen?" asked Tony as I stepped back inside. "Well, we can't go left. Someone shot at me when I looked around the corner. The office block next to us to the right is on fire with the crash, so we can't stay here. Not and risk it if the fire jumps to this block. No sign of the looters. The plane must have taken them out." I looked around. "Where's Sandra?" I said and sighed, then headed outside. She was stood in the middle of the street looking down toward where the fuselage had come to a halt and broken up. "What are you doing out in the open? Get back here," I said, and she turned to me. "We can make it through. I can see the street is empty with the flames lighting up the street and there's a gap where the plane is split in 2. I shook my head at the suggestion. "Have you any idea just how hot it would be trying to get through there?" She was quick to reply. "So, there must be water in the bathrooms. We should wet our clothes and hair and run through. Gloria and Tony can pedal through. Look, there might be more than one thug stalking us. It's not like we can hang around and wait for the fire to spread to our block." I stroked my chin. She was right. We could get flanked if there were more of them. There was bound to be water in the pipes from the tank in the office block, I thought. "Okay, but we need to run it by Tony and Gloria. Let's get inside." "Thought you'd left us," said Tony. I huffed at the suggestion. "You know the drill, no man left behind, and in this case the women too." With the escape plan put to them, I awaited his reply as they exchanged concerned looks with each other. Part 4. Tony and Gloria seemed to be frozen in thought at the suggestion of passing through the gap with the fuselage on fire. All the same, the last thing I wanted was for whoever was stalking us to gain the advantage. My patience wore thin. Look, you have to decide, like now or we'll have to leave you here. Once we get past the downed aircraft, it's only 2 blocks to Gloria's condo. Tony was quick to respond, a pained expression on his face. Hell, Rob, that's a bit dramatic. I threw it back at him right away. Dramatic. We've got someone at our ass end with firepower. What's it to be? Gloria helped him to his feet. You're right, we have to go, she said. All of us scrambled to the restroom. This wasn't the time for hygiene considerations as I picked up a trash can and tipped out the contents. I did the honors for the 3 of them, filling the can with water and pouring it over them. Sandra took it from me and did the honors for me, pouring the water over my head as a shock to the system. A few more cans full of water swished over us to ensure our clothing was fully wet through, and we made for the exit. No time was wasted as Gloria and Tony pedaled on ahead with Sandra and me running in their slipstream. My heart pumped at a rate of knots as we neared, nerves on edge. The heat was searing. Tony and Gloria pedaled for all they were worth when Sandra took a hold of my hand, and we followed them. Talk about entering the jaws of hell. It only took seconds to get through, but even when through the gap, it was as though my ass was on fire, such was the inferno. But we were through and the relief running through me was tremendous. Sandra and I bent over, grasping at our knees while we caught our breath. Call it nervousness in the aftermath of the experience, but the both of us laughed out loud. The laughter soon stopped as we raised our heads. Sandra's mouth gaped as did mine, I imagined. With the narrow road between the tower blocks, I could now see why it had no wings. I could see one wing in the distance, with the one the nearest to us followed by a flaming line of ignited fuel the length of a football field down the center of the road. The bodies of passengers and some body parts were strewn around on the road with the putrid odor of burning fuel and burned flesh in the air. Destroyed suitcases and their contents, together with passenger seats, intermingled. Ahead, Tony had climbed off his bike and was throwing up on the sidewalk. We headed over there. It must have been the body of a looter that had upset him, with the looter's rifle across his black and charred body, his hand frozen in a reaching out pose, unrecognizable as human other than the skeletal blackened frame. Come on, Tony, not far to go now, I said and helped him onto his bike. The entire scene back there had me in an alternate zone, unable to get the images out of my head. It was such a relief to arrive at Gloria's condo. Gloria turned to us. Best come on in and we'll put the bikes in the foyer ready for when you leave, said Gloria. Sandra can dry off and take some of my clothes. Tony has some of his clothes here. They'll be on the large size for you, sorry. I didn't care as long as they were dry. The wet suit and shirt I was wearing, now stuck to my skin and felt heavy on the body in the cold night air. Once inside we changed, with Tony and I taking a seat on the couch. Man, that was some experience, said Tony. How long do you think the energy will be out? I shrugged my shoulders, literally and physically in the dark as much as him. Only God can answer that, but he ain't talking to me, I said. Sandra exited the bathroom with a towel around her head. We'd better be going before someone steals the bikes, she said. Tony grabbed me by the arm. We'll get through this, he said. See you when the energy is restored. His words were bravado, with his expression telling me he was scared shitless. Better take this, I said and handed him one of the rifles. His eyes widened. Do you think I'll need it, he asked as I rose from the couch. Better safe than sorry. You never know. Look, if this isn't temporary and you run out of supplies, you know where Rathbone has his yacht docked. He always has it stocked with supplies. Sorry, we have to go. Good luck to the 2 of you. We hurried out of there and down to the bikes, not looking forward to the journey to Sandra's condo, fearful of what other obstruction we might find in our way. Part 5. With Tony and Gloria safely ensconced in her condo, I began to think I'd made a mistake giving him the rifle now we were out in the open and vulnerable. While wheeling the bikes outside, I turned to her. Do you know how to use that Glock I gave you? She clicked her tongue and gave me a disdainful glance. Just shows how little you know about me. I know how to use it, don't worry. Maybe if you hung around instead of leaving a dent in the pillow that told me you'd been there, you'd have more of an insight. There was a sense of heat in my cheeks as I must have been blushing. She was right, I knew very little about her. It wasn't exactly wham bam thank you ma'am when we got together, because I enjoyed our trysts, and the warmth of us in bed together, our arms around each other, which was more than comforting. It was just that conversation was never part of the foreplay between either of us. We arrived at her apartment and wheeled the bikes inside. Do you think we'd be better staying here? She called out from the bathroom. That didn't seem to be an option to me. I just wanted to get to my apartment and change clothes, pick up my bug-out bag and tent, and to head for the countryside up north. One thing I didn't want was to be stuck in the city once people's supplies ran out and the chaos that would follow if the situation went on for any length of time. In the kitchen area, I opened the refrigerator. It was empty apart from a half-full carton of milk, a fruit juice and a prepackaged sandwich. A shake of the head and I answered her. We can't stay here. Not if that's the only food you have. What do you do for eating? She came up beside me and closed the refrigerator door. I eat out or send for takeaways. It's my only luxury afforded me by my work. Take a seat while I get changed and put a pack of clothes together. She disappeared into the bedroom. A second bedroom door was open and I peeked inside. There was a luxurious bed surrounded by lighting and an expensive-looking camera at the foot of the bed with a microphone boom. Some work I thought and then stepped over to the couch. My mouth gaped when she walked into the room. There she was, dressed head to toe in a camouflaged outfit, with a heavy backpack, and a hunting rifle. What the hell? Do you use that outfit as part of your work? Is it for some kind of fetish I've not heard about that your followers like? She snickered. See, I told you. You know nothing about me. Wait, what do you mean by fetish? For your OnlyFans followers. She stood there, hands on hips. Where the hell did you get that from? She snapped at me, clearly agitated. We'd never talked about what she did for work and I guessed she would be embarrassed about what she did for a living. Now the cat was out of the bag, so there was no point not telling how I'd heard that's what she did for a living. The guys at the bar told me. She huffed, not looking pleased at all. Did they now? Well, that's not what I do. What I do is to go hunting at the weekends during the hunting season for ducks. Sometimes for deer with a group of us. I turned it into a YouTube channel to film my exploits and do monologues from my apartment. Never expected it to go viral and get monetized. Anyway, now you know. I now felt so stupid, not only for believing the gossip to be true, but I also felt ridiculous at asking her if she knew how to use a pistol, which was more of a pea shooter by comparison. The hunting rifle put the Glock to shame. Sorry, I said, sort of now seeing her in a different light. She didn't respond, simply brushing past me. Out in the hallway, I glanced through the door as she was about to turn her key in the lock. Damn, they're out there, I called out to her. There were 5 of them on bikes. The one in the center wore a motorbike helmet and appeared to be dressed in black. It had to be the same guy she'd seen stalking us and the same one from the bar. More than their firepower worried me, when I shivered at seeing one holding a machete. It flashed through my mind they hadn't taken kindly to taking out some of their gang. She pushed me to one side and thrust the handle of a broom through the doorway handles, then turned to her door and locked it. Quick, let's get through the fire door at the back, she said. There was no need to tell me twice. They must have seen us as we grabbed the bikes and a round burst through the glass door, thankfully not shattering it to give them access. I could hear them pounding on the glass door as we exited and pedaled like hell. All I wanted was to put distance between us and to hope they wouldn't find us again. Part 6. A quick look over my shoulder back at the fire exit and my heart sank. The thugs had burst their way through and all we had was 100 yards start on them. As we pedaled on, occasionally looking over my shoulder, at least they weren't gaining on us. Not sure if Sandra knew they were on our tail, so I called out to her. They're behind us. This is your territory, any ideas? Until then, she'd been looking straight ahead with a determined expression on her face. Follow me, she called back and turned sharp right, then did a quick turn left down an alley. She pulled up to a halt at a 4-foot-high wall to a small garden area. Sandra jumped off the bike and hauled it over the wall. I wasn't about to ask questions and followed her lead. Crouched behind the wall among bushes, Sandra drew her pistol. With my strap unshouldered to my rifle, I made ready for anything that might come at us. The tires of their bikes swished by to a release of tension as if a valve had opened at the top of my head to release the pressure. It was only then that I realized we were not alone when I turned to look over my shoulder and tugged at Sandra's sleeve. At the far side of the garden there were tents at what I assumed was a homeless encampment and people sitting around a fire. I'd never seen so many supermarket carts, only outside of the stores. We soon had the explanation when two people pushed carts along the pathway and we heard them talking. It seemed as though they were returning from a looting expedition from the local supermarket. From what I could make out through the bushes, the carts were stacked with cans of beer, then they headed towards the encampment. Clearly, the blackout was a bonus for them. Sandra turned to me. We should stay here and get some sleep. Set off before dawn to your apartment when everyone will be asleep and those thugs long gone. I had to agree with her, when I turned to the sound of tires swishing once more than the sound of screeching of one of the bike's brakes. There was the sound of the bikes clattering as I assumed they'd dropped them on the road. Heart in my mouth, 10 yards further down I saw their shadows leaping over the wall. Not 5 of them, but at least 20 I counted. They spread out and marched over to the tent encampment, checking behind the bushes in the flower beds, I imagined looking for us. Daring to take a look out onto the road, there were even more of them milling around and all heavily armed, and I ducked back down. Hispanic by the sound of their banter. I wondered just what the hell I'd walked into at the incident at the bar that now seemed to be stalking us like a foul smell. Flinching, the staccato sound of automatic gunfire filled the air. Muzzle flashes and screams cut through the quiet over at the homeless camp. We exchanged wide-eyed glances when it stopped to an eerie quiet. Peeking through the bushes, the thugs were filling the carts with whatever the poor homeless souls had looted. Thanking God my watch wasn't electronic, I checked the time. It was 1:30 in the morning. The situation seemed hopeless. From what I could make out, they'd left a guard to watch over the loot, and the rest headed for the gated exit. Go get the women to collect the carts, I heard someone call out in a strong Spanish accent. Rest of us will spread out and take each intersection to look for them. They can't have gone far. I'm guessing they're hiding out. I assumed it was us they were looking for. Just why they'd not let go and get on with their looting only God knew why. As soon as they pedaled away, it still didn't give us an exit route, not if they were guarding the intersections in the area. I entered that zone again that Mom chastised me for, working out a whole host of scenarios as to how to get us out of the fix we were in. Part 7. Laying low for around 30 minutes and keeping an eye on the thugs who had taken the place of the homeless around the campfire, they were clearly enjoying themselves. It made me cringe as they laughed and joked while swigging what I assumed were the cans of stolen beers, surrounded as they were by the bodies of those poor souls they dispatched. A group of women arrived and walked over to them, then took a hold of the carts, and with the thugs escorting them, they exited through the gates, thankfully in the direction of Sandra's apartment. Having concentrated on watching them, I could now look around. Beyond the gardens, I could now see lights on in the odd apartment. Clearly, some had prepared for the event and taken notice of the news broadcasts. A thought struck me. I turned to Sandra. We have to get away from here and to my apartment. The streets are quiet now, but tomorrow they'll be awash with people looking for supplies. Sandra looked to be deep in thought before she replied. That could be our saving grace if we get some sleep now those thugs have gone. We could use the people on the streets tomorrow for cover. They're not likely to stay around forever. If they're alert now, they'll have to sleep in the morning. Her thinking was sound. It had been better than all the scenarios I had conjured up in my mind involving taking them on. You stay here, she said, and before I could protest, she stalked over to the tent area. She returned with 2 sleeping bags and handed one over. For God's sake, don't do that to me without I know what you're doing. She simply shrugged at the put down. Thinking about it, with her outfit, it was best she'd stalked over there. With the bags unzipped and snuggled inside them, we chatted away in low tones. Goodness knows how long we talked, but it was enough time for us both to learn about each other, our dreams. Our aspirations for the future. Seems we weren't that far apart on what we hoped for going forward. Both of us were gutted at what had happened, with me losing my wealth on the stock exchange and her likely having her money frozen in her bank account with the servers likely blitzed. Apparently, she'd bought land up north near the forests where she did her hunting, and she'd almost earned enough to build a small holding there. In that respect she was further on than me in what I hoped to do. Eyes heavy it didn't bear thinking about, and I drifted to sleep. When I awoke Sandra put her hand over my mouth with one hand and a finger to her lips with her other hand. It was clear why. I could hear footsteps over the wall and people talking. She pointed 2 fingers to her eyes, then exchanged them for one finger pointed in the direction of the homeless camp. It was a hive of activity with National Guard collecting the bodies and placing them in a line, with one of them covering them with their own bedding. Sandra stripped down her rifle and stowed it in her backpack. "You'd better hide yours under your coat," she said. "Let's go." She took a quick look over at the National Guard, then hoisted her bike over the wall and then followed it to the other side. Following her lead, I was right behind her. A glance at my watch and it was 7 in the morning. The streets weren't awash with people, but there were more than I reckoned there would be at that time of day. A quick glance at my radiation badge and it was in the green zone. Looking skyward there were no northern lights with a blue sky clear of clouds. It looked as though the solar flares were spent and I gave a silent prayer all would soon be back to normal. That was tempered with a fear of dread at seeing clouds of smoke at different compass bearings, rising into the morning sky. I let out a sigh of resignation while thinking about the destruction the sun flares had caused. Pedaling onward we passed a crowd of disappointed-looking people outside a burned-out supermarket with the glass facade smashed and overturned shopping carts scattered around the parking lot. As we approached the intersection my heart thumped, knowing I didn't have a permit for the AR-15 hidden under my jacket. There were 5 National Guards and a police officer stood in the middle of the road and the officer flagged us down. A bunch of people were sat on the floor, hands cuffed behind their backs and a stash of looted goods in a pile beside of them. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I need to get over the Brooklyn Bridge to my apartment," I replied. He shook his head, hawked up some phlegm and spat it on the concrete. "No chance. 2 container ships have run into the struts and brought some of the bridge down. You can't go ahead. Plane crash and we have buildings on fire. The airplanes due for landing were dropping like flies last night." Thankfully, many did the honorable thing and headed out to sea to ditch, God rest their souls. I exchanged glances with Sandra. I'd seen the smoke bellowing ahead. My demeanor nose-dived. "Any news about getting the power on?" I asked. One of the National Guardsmen stepped over. "They're working on it. Some areas still have power. All the roads are gridlocked with abandoned cars, and some people having slept in them. They've called in the army to clear them so they can get crews in to replace the transformers. The generators have survived, thank God, and the EMPs haven't knocked all the cars out. We're told that with many of the servers situated underground and screened, everything should be back up and running in time. The damned battery manufacturers will have a field day. Anyway, better turn around," he said as more people arrived only to be stopped. Mention of the battery manufacturers struck a note, seeing as that's where I held most of my stocks. Sandra turned to me. "That yacht you mentioned at Gloria's apartment that you said will have supplies. Where is it docked? Could we go there?" This time it was my turn to say follow me and we turned our bikes around. For all the gloom, after what the guardsman had said, I now had some hope all was not lost. Heading to the marina, we passed an intersection. A guy was sat in a doorway next to a mountain bike. He definitely had an Hispanic appearance. He scowled at me as our eyes locked. That sort of upped the tempo as far as the pedaling was concerned. We turned at another intersection only for me to see a guy with a mountain bike asleep in a doorway. The other guy appeared and thankfully stopped to wake him up. That was our chance as I turned at the next intersection to get us to the marina. With Rathbone's yacht in sight, it looked as though we'd made it to hide out there. As we boarded I looked over my shoulder with some apprehension that those guys after us might arrive and see us. Part 8. Stood at the entrance to get below deck, a sense of urgency to get down there overcame me. "Quick, get down here," I said, then froze at hearing voices below deck. That was all we needed. Whoever it was must have heard us, leaving me craning my neck while pulling the pistol from my waistband. I swept my arm behind me for Sandra to stop where she was. Sandra leaned in, then crouched and whispered. Our nemesis has arrived, but they've not seen us. There wasn't any other option but to challenge who was below deck. Who is it down there? Show yourselves. I'm armed, so no funny business. The reply stunned me. Rob, is that you? I heard Tony call out. Jesus Tony, what the hell are you doing here? I said as the cabin door opened, and we both stepped inside to face Tony and Gloria. Tony had his feet up on the couch, feeding his face. You told us to come here. When we checked what food she had, she'd not done the weekly shop, so we thought it best to make our way to here. Yeah, well, get your ass off of there. We have company. Don't want to get stuck down here, or we'll be trapped. Better grab your rifle. It's the gang from the bar. God knows why they won't leave us be. We overheard they were looking for us. Turning my head to look behind me, I saw Sandra tripping back up the stairway and turned to follow on. When I arrived on deck, she was on her belly, peering through the hole where the chain of the anchor threaded through the hull. She slipped off her backpack and rolled onto her side, then reassembled her rifle. See anything? I asked. Yeah, that guy with the helmet. It looked as though he was giving orders and they've dispersed to check the boats along the jetty. How many? I asked her. At least 20, she replied. 3 against 20 didn't sound like healthy odds. Maybe 4 of us if Gloria knew how to handle a weapon. It wasn't like we were awash with ammo. Tony and Gloria crawled up beside of us. Can you use a weapon? I asked Gloria. She shook her head, trepidation in her eyes. Why let them follow you? Asked Tony. I threw him a look. What do you think? Do you think I left them a map? What a stupid thing to say. This must be the gang's territory. They likely have eyes everywhere on the street. You should put your mind to how we get out of this instead of coming up with lame remarks. Sorry, he said. Better think quick, said Sandra. They're working their way along the jetty checking all the boats. I glanced over at the mooring ropes. They were taut. There was no chance of slipping them off their fastening. That would have to be done from the jetty. Anyone know how to sail a yacht if we cut the mooring ropes? I asked. Everyone shook their heads in the negative. It looked as though that was out of the window as a plan. Besides, the battery to start the motor was probably fried, and there wasn't exactly a breeze to sail us out into the sunset. There's an inflatable with an outboard motor, said Tony. Good thinking. Is it electronic ignition with a battery or a pull cord? Dunno, he replied. Well, better go and check it out. It might be our only way out of here. Tony scrambled away on his belly. I turned to Gloria. There'll be a radio in the control room. Sneak over there and check it out to see if it works. We could do with some cavalry just now. She scrambled away. I worked my way over to where the rope exited to the mooring and peered through the gap in the hole. You ready? I called out to Sandra, with no need to keep quiet as they were heading right for us. Tony came up alongside of me. It's a pull cord, we're in luck. He was saying that, but I estimated our luck had just run out. Better take the other rope exit and get ready for action, single bullets and only if a target is a dead cert. Yes sir, Sarge, he said and scuttled away. The radio isn't working, said Gloria as she came up alongside of me. Okay, at least we tried. I need you to get behind the control room, the shit's about to hit the fan, I said, my eye glued to looking down the barrel. If we're overrun, we'll have to dive overboard and try swimming away. Gloria gulped, and then stooped as she made her way to hide. Looking out front, I now knew what we were up against. The guy who seemed to be in charge took off his helmet. What an ugly sight. His appearance was enough to scare the pants off anyone. No wonder he wore that helmet to hide his face to avoid witnesses identifying him. His head was shaven. Neck, face and the top of his head were a mass of tattoos. It looked as though we'd landed in MS-13 gang territory, the notorious El Salvadorian thugs, and messed up their day back at the bar. I glanced either side of me. Count of 3, let them have it. You take the outside ones and I'll take the middle ones. Let's see if we can thin them out and frighten them off. By the time I looked down my barrel, the leader had put back on his helmet and was behind one of the gang members. It was the head of the snake I needed to take out, their leader, but first I'd have to shoot the one in front of him. A squeeze of the trigger and my target fell. I lined up to take out the leader to a click when I pulled the trigger. The mag was empty. I'd made a rookie mistake and cursed under my breath at the others firing off rounds while I fumbled for the spare mag while rounds thudded all round me from the gang's return fire. I couldn't see how we could get out of this alive. Part 9. All went quiet by the time I'd snapped in the mag and looked out at the scene. It looked as though we'd taken 5 of them out, with one of their wounded getting dragged behind a container where they were likely taking refuge. It was just our bad luck and the unbelievable idiocy of me not having checked the mag before the action that none of the dead bodies could I identify as their leader. So much for me taking the lead and giving the orders. It made me feel as though I had imposter syndrome as a greenhorn, rather than as an ex-soldier with experience. "How many rounds have you left?" I asked Sandra in a low tone. She spread out her fingers and held out her palms that showed me she had 9 rounds left. Then she pulled out the pistol and showed me 7 fingers. Tony crawled over to me as I checked the rounds in my pistol, relieved I had a full mag. "Check your ammo," I said. He tightened his lips and then answered. "I'm out." The rifle only had 2 rounds. Luckily, both of them counted. "So, what's the plan now?" I handed him my pistol. "You and Gloria see if you can get that inflatable over the side. Then we'll try to make an escape on the water while it's quiet." "Oh, yeah, better check it has gas before doing anything." He nodded then answered. "Right away. It's on a rotating arm with a motor winch, but it also has a handle for use as a hand winch." Thank God for that, I thought. "Off you go," I said and took a look over at Sandra. She was concentrating, looking out onto the jetty, her eye glued to her scope. On my belly, I crawled over to her. "See anything?" I asked. "Nothing. Not a sound either. They must be licking their wounds and working out what to do next." "I hoped they were thinking of calling it a day after their losses," she said then sighed. That got me thinking why in hell's name they'd take the losses. I shrugged my shoulders then turned to her. "Yeah, well, while they're doing that, Tony is launching the inflatable. Unless they scamper away, that'll be our escape route." A squeeze of her trigger and to an explosion of the round she called out. "Grenade!" she screamed and rolled away from the anchor port. Even with my hands over my ears and curled into a ball, the explosion of the grenade deafened me. Shrapnel zipped by peppering the hull to me flinching. Thankfully, she must have shot him as he released it, so it hadn't reached the yacht. Sandra rolled back to look outside. "Shit, they're charging and taking cover behind barrels," she said and squeezed off another round. Tony snaked up beside me. "It's in the water." "What if we can't get the motor to work?" he asked. "Then we'll have to swim." "Sandra. Let's go." "No, you go. They're still stalking forward from barrel to barrel and taking cover," she said to her, firing off another round. "Go, I'll cover you." To a thunderous explosion on the aft deck, a grenade exploded. "Fuck this, all of us go now for Christ's sake," I called out, dragging Sandra by her backpack straps from where she lay. "Get to the boat, now," I said, and flicking the upgraded rifle to auto, while throwing caution to the wind, I stood and sprayed rounds at them, hitting a barrel to an explosion of fuel igniting and exploding. "Come on, let's get the hell out of here," said Tony, tugging at my leg. We all charged to the rear to get to our lifesaver. Gloria was already in the inflatable. I hauled Tony back and gave him a look. "Let Sandra go first, I'll go last to give cover," I said, and she climbed down the ladder and into the boat. My attention turned to the gangway. One of the gang appeared and I took him out with a single shot. Tony was struggling to climb down the ladder. Nerves frazzled, I could hear someone pulling on the cord to the engine spluttering, but it didn't fire up. 2 more of the gang appeared, but by the time I fired off a round, they'd dived for cover. A quick glance at the boat and Sandra was pulling on the cord and getting nowhere. At least Tony had made it in there. A silent "Please help us all, God," and I sprayed bullets in the direction of those hiding just as I heard the engine roar to life. With no cover and rounds returned, bullets splintering around me, I tossed my rifle to Tony and jumped into the water. Tony and Gloria hauled me onto the inflatable, and with Sandra at the helm, she ripped us away from the boat with a burst of speed, the engine roaring. It was no time to rest easy as more of the gang appeared on the yacht, firing off rounds in our direction. Most splashed in the water out of harm's way, but one ripped into Tony's arm, another striking the inflatable's rubber. Gloria, pass me Tony's pistol. She removed it from his waistband and handed it over. I fired off shots at our assailants, hoping they'd keep their heads down until the magazine was spent of bullets. Thankfully, we were at last out of range. Gloria was busy stripping off Tony's coat and shirt to get to treat his wound. As much as I hoped he'd survive, I was more concerned at the rip in the rubber with the air escaping. The fact I was wet through and shivering seemed to be of no consequence. I imagined we'd all be wet soon. A shiver and I looked around. It was just as far to get back to the bank we'd set off from as it was to get to the opposite bank. Sandra and I exchanged worried glances. Guess we both knew the trouble we were in if we didn't make it to the opposite bank without we'd sink. Part 10. It was a nerve-wracking time as eventually Sandra had to reduce speed as the air dispersed, for fear we'd get waterlogged. Tony and Gloria had been oblivious to the predicament as she'd used Sandra's medic kit from her pack to bandage him up, but with their eyes wide and holding on to each other, now they could both see the predicament we were in, as water swished into our craft. What was the damage? I asked Gloria, hoping to take her mind off the problem. Superficial. Just a flesh wound, she replied. The relief was palpable as we grounded in the shallows close to the bank, all of us standing and wading ankle-deep to the shore at the Brooklyn Bridge Park. There wasn't anyone around taking advantage of the peaceful surroundings when we arrived there. Apart from Sandra wearing waterproofs, Tony and Gloria's backsides were wet through, and I was dripping wet, my clothes sticking to me. Stay here. I'll go get some kindling for a fire so you can all dry off, said Sandra. She returned with arms full of brush. She set them down and took out a lighter from her pack and a small bottle of fluid and a ball of cotton wool. I looked on as she squeezed out fluid onto the cotton wool, then ignited it and placed it under the brush. Thought you'd have some sort of survival sparker to light the fire, I said. She was quick to reply. I have one, but lighters are so cheap, it's not worth the trouble. Beats rubbing sticks together though, she said and laughed. I had to admire her. It was like she was a different woman to the one I escorted home from the bar on Friday nights. With the fire roaring and branches added, Tony and Gloria stood with their backsides to the fire to dry off. I had no alternative but to strip to my underwear and to hang my clothes from branches. I don't get it, said Tony. Why did they allow themselves to get shot? Don't know, but I know who they were now after I saw their leader take off his helmet. Never seen so many tattoos on a face before. MS-13 by the looks of him. Tony threw his hands in the air. Ah, well, that explains it. I've read up on them. If they don't do what they're ordered, it's a bullet in the head anyway, then they dismember them with machetes, or, maybe it's the other way around, can't remember now. Anyway, what do we do now? We don't have provisions. I turned to him. Problem solved. I have plenty of food and we don't have the problem of crossing the Brooklyn Bridge to get to my apartment. All we need to do is to wait for our clothes to dry out. At least we're safe. Sandra walked over and put her arms around me and kissed me on the cheek. If we run out of food at your apartment, we can trek up north and hunt for what we need. If we don't have any more ammo, I can set wire traps for rabbits. Good thinking, I said. I have weapons at home and lots of ammo. That's what I intended to do anyway. Will you be up for that, Tony? Yeah, guess so. Maybe a few days for the aches and pains from that beating I took to go away and I'll be fine. What about you, Gloria? She turned to me. I'm going wherever Tony goes. Besides, I'll be able to help if any more of us need seeing to, or if any of you have an accident. Sandra stepped over and ran a finger over the scar on my chest. I never did ask where you got that scar from. Tony and I exchanged quick glances. I had a flashback to the day the bullet ripped through my upper chest, thankfully missing my vital organs and veins. Incapacitated and with only a slimmed-down version of Tony by my side, with him fighting off the insurgents attacking our position single-handed, then seeing to my wound, and giving me morphine, until the evac finally arrived, I doubt I'd have lived. But for him, I'd have bled out. I shrugged and shivered at the thought. It was a wonder I didn't have PTSD. The only version I had of PTSD was when I was shipped home only to find out that bitch fiancé of mine had been having an affair and called it off between us. Sandra tugged at my arm. Well, come on. Are you going to tell me? Sorry, yeah. Wounded in action. It's nothing. I was saying that, but I owed my life to Tony and would do the same for him. With the clothing dry, helped with the sun glaring down, I dressed and sat on the grass. Sandra took a seat at the side of me. I've been thinking. If you enjoy the outdoors and hunting when we go north, what do you think about going with me at weekends? I could show you the land I bought. After getting to know her, I thought there was nothing I'd like better. Sounds like a plan. We'll talk about it when things are back to normal. Sure, she said. Look, I'd better take my binoculars and go check out. They've not found a boat to get to us. They seem to be determined to wipe us out. I can't see them giving up. I turned to her. You go. My shoes haven't dried out yet. Just be careful, I said, though having complete trust in her prowess to look after herself. Talk about relief as I sat there with Tony and Gloria joining me, bantering and laughing about the close encounters we'd had. It seemed strange laughing about taking lives, but then they were the scum of the earth and the laughter was more about the release of nerves at still being alive. We all turned at the sound of boots clomping along the pathway. Sandra was back and running. They're here. Well, not here exactly on dry land, but their boat is close to the shore. They must have found another inflatable on one of the other yachts. How are we for ammo? She asked. My rifle is out of ammo. What's left in the pistol of mine that Gloria passed to you? Asked Tony. Empty. I dropped the mag to my rifle and sighed. Shit, that's empty too. What about you, Sandra? Still have 7 in the pistol, but only 2 left for my rifle. She dropped the mag to the pistol and flicked out 4 bullets. Here, put those in your pistol, she said. Better make them count. Let's get the hell out of here. We set off, with me looking over my shoulder and guiding us along the tree line in the park. Talk about squeaky butt time as the adrenaline flowed once more, at thoughts of them catching up with us. Part 11. Almost out of the park, and Tony stubbed his foot, going down awkwardly on his ankle. Gloria and I tried to help him to his feet, but he was whimpering in pain and unable to put pressure on this foot to walk. That was all we needed. Let's get to that flower bed and behind those trees, I said, and placed his arm over my shoulder for him to hop over there. I set him down behind a stout tree trunk and looked over my shoulder. When I looked around, Sandra had gone AWOL. I guessed I'd read her wrong after all, and she'd skedaddled to save herself. The bastard thugs appeared at the far end of the park. 4 of them, including that ugly leader of theirs. One of them must have seen me and pointed. I could have ran, but there was no way I was about to leave Tony and Gloria behind, especially at thoughts of what Tony had said about how they dispatched people. It was time to pay Tony back, God willing. With the 4 of them, I had 4 bullets, hopefully with each of the thugs' names on them. One of them must have spotted me and pointed. My heart sank and I darted behind the tree next to Tony and Gloria. They're here, I said. Brace yourselves. Tony reached out and pulled a fallen branch to him, for all the good that would have done as a weapon. You have to go, Gloria. Run, Tony said. I'm not leaving you here, she replied, and she took a hold of his hand. It was looking as though it was all down to me and those 4 bullets. I took a quick look out from the tree trunk to see them marching spread out towards me. I took aim and fired off a shot, felling one of them. I had to duck back at the fierceness of the return fire, bullets thudding in the tree trunk. I dropped to my belly and crawled over to the next tree trunk, then took aim and dropped another of them, but he only clutched at his leg, and I cursed. 2 shots down and only 2 bullets left with 3 of them out there. There was the sudden explosion of a high-caliber rifle round and looking through the bushes, the guy I'd wounded, his head exploded in a mist of blood and brain matter. Sandra hadn't gone at all, she'd taken up a position to flank them, when to another round fired, it hit one of them in the chest, his arms flailing, then he hit the ground. Confident she was covering us. I fired off 2 shots, but they were zigzagging, and both missed. That was it. I was out of ammo. It was all down to Sandra now to take out the last 2 before they got to us. With the 7 bullets in her pistol, she was our only hope. Another guy stalked out, and sure enough, she was as good an aim with a pistol and she dispatched him. All that was left was the ugly guy. It wasn't looking as though he had the same balls as his minions when Sandra arrived behind me. What do we do now, she asked. I wasn't sure what we could do but spoke out loud the way my mind was thinking. We can't go anywhere with Tony's ankle screwed. Let's wait and see what the guy decides. He might just value his life and head back to the boat. A good 15 minutes passed with not a sound. Just how my heart hadn't exploded with the rate it pumped at speed in my chest, only God knows. A voice cut through the silence. Hey Gringo. How about you and me finish this man to man? I wasn't sure if I should answer and maybe he'd think we'd gone, but a question branded on my brain had me running off at the mouth. What's there to finish? What have we done wrong? It's you that's chasing us. Just go and leave us in peace, then no one gets hurt. Enough of you have died already. He answered right away. Not enough have died. You're still alive. You killed my sons back there at the bar. If you want to end this, step out and face me. I turned to Sandra. Holy crap, does he think I'm stupid enough to step out there? She glanced over my shoulder. Maybe not, but he is. Look behind you, she said. Take the shot, I said. She shook her head. No, I can't, he's too close to the tree. Wait, he's thrown out his rifle, said Sandra. I spun around. We can't shoot an unarmed man, thug or not. Sandra put her hand on my shoulder. I don't trust him. He could be hiding a pistol in his waistband. She was likely right, I thought. He could, I guess. Do you have anything in that backpack of yours we could tie him up with? If I could overpower him, we could secure him, then report him to any National Guard we come across. She snapped back at me. I have twine, but he isn't going to fight by any wrestling rules. I shook my head. Who said anything about fighting? Put your pistol in my waistband at my back. I'll have him step out to lift his jacket to see to make sure he's not armed. I'll step out and you come out behind me with your hands in the air. As I lift my jacket and start to turn around, take the pistol and we'll have him. Then we can tie him up and get the hell to my apartment. Sandra lifted her shoulders then dropped them. I guess it might work. If he is out of ammo, how about we just run? We can't. Tony, remember. Not just that. Even if Tony could hobble away, there are some rifles out there he could grab. She scratched at her hair. Okay, if that's what you want to do, she said, but I'll not put the pistol in your waistband, she said, and then tucked her pistol into her waistband at the front, then closed her jacket. Any funny business with a hidden weapon and just shoot him, I said. I called out to him. We're out of ammo too. I picked up my rifle and threw it out, then did the same with Sandra's rifle, then called out to him again. How do I know I can trust you? You step out first and lift your jacket to show you're not armed. Then I'll do the same. It's just the two of us here. The others have gone on ahead. Thinking about it, I didn't expect him to step out. In a role reversal, I wouldn't have moved but I'd have headed back to the boat. It was something of a shock then when he stepped out, tossing a machete to one side, then lifted his jacket to show his tattooed midriff, then turned around. I guessed his thirst for revenge outweighed any thoughts of retreating. Slipping off my jacket, I stepped out, hands partly raised with Sandra following on, hopefully with her hands in the air, but not so high she'd get to retrieve the pistol quickly. Let's see you're not carrying a weapon. Lift your shirt and turn around. Same for your bitch, he called over to us. I'd not thought of that. I lifted my shirt and turned around quickly, to see a pistol dropping from his jacket sleeve to his hand, and he pointed it in our direction before Sandra had had a chance to draw hers. On your knees the both of you, he said, and stooped to pick up the machete, not taking his eyes or his aim from us. I'll dismember you first after I've put a bullet in your skull for your bitch to see, then rape her and do the same to her. That'll be my revenge quenched, gringo, he said, then laughed like someone demented. I stepped back. For Christ's sake run, I said, not taking my eyes off of him. He extended his gun arm, holding it on its side, gangster style, and him squinting down the barrel. I gritted my teeth when he squeezed the trigger to the click of an empty chamber. Move, said Sandra, brushing me aside, pistol drawn when the darndest thing happened in a flash. Something struck him, splitting his skull in half, and he collapsed to the ground. Whatever it was, steam rose from the object stuck in his skull, frying his brain. We stepped over there. It was a sheet of metal. Looking skyward, there wasn't any sign of an aircraft breaking up, or any sound of an aircraft crashing nearby. What there was on the blackened metal were raised lettering. NASA, it read. Hand on mouth, it had to be from a high-altitude satellite that had been blasted out of orbit with the solar winds and taken its time to enter the atmosphere and fall to Earth. Sandra linked my arm in hers. Hell, I don't think I forget the day the sky fell in a hurry, she said. Me neither. I think God just crapped on him from the heavens. Thank goodness it's over. Let's see if we can get Tony to my apartment. We've had enough tension for one day to last a lifetime. Part 12. The Epilogue. 12 months later and the four of us were on sun loungers drinking iced cocktails in the Bahamas. I was thinking it's strange how things turned out. That National Guard had been right about the battery manufacturer's stock. Cashed the stock in with enough to retire on and then some. As for Tony and Gloria, she'd had him on a diet, and he was back to his old slim self. Not just that, but marriage suited them both as he raised his glass and slurped while sucking on his straw. He's still working as a trader, but not me. I've been living in an RV with Sandra on her plot of land, waiting for the builders to complete our eco-off-the-grid house, so we can move in and we can get the baby's room ready for when she's due next month. One thing is certain, I'll never ignore warnings from scientists again. In any event, now I'm a born-again prepper and hunter, I'll be prepared. Dear listener, if you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to like it, and to subscribe for more stories on the channel, with more to come. Declan Conner is the author of a catalog of full-length psychological, crime, and speculative thriller fiction books available on Amazon in all territories. You'll find the link in the description. Once again, thank you for listening. You'll find other stories if you subscribe to my channel.